Rings of Power, Season 1. So today we're going to do the recap of the first season. Nick and I are going to give our thoughts on the show, both the positive and the negative, and maybe some thoughts about the next upcoming seasons, what might be improved upon. But then, of course, as always, we're going to dive a little bit deeper, looking at the psychology and the social impact that these pop culture um, events play out. Yeah, Jack. Today we're talking about Rings of Power, season one retrospective, um, and we're going to have interesting discussion here because we have coming at it from different points of view. I think it'll be fun. We're going to talk about what worked and what didn't, and that's going to be a different list for each of us. So I'm hoping maybe some people out there will stop all of their silly screaming about things and have an in-depth discussion without getting bonkers. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's just a TV show. I don't know why people get so worked up about this stuff. Anyway, so I've got in my notes here, I've got some things like what worked for me. And of course, I want to get your discussion points on that and what didn't work for me and that. And I think the lists will be proportionate to each other, inversely so. Because I at the end of my overall impression of it is I enjoyed the hell out of it, the first season. But before I get into like what worked for me anyway, I wanted to ask you what were the things that you did like about the show and the season, and then what are your thoughts about like we'll get into the sort of deeper psychological stuff like we usually do later, but
yeah.
We'll start off with that.
What worked for me?
If anything, right? If anything worked for you.
If
anything nothing worked
for
you, that's fair too.
I think the costume designer and the kind of the just visually, it definitely was beautiful. I think whoever had the task of putting together all those costumes and whatnot and bringing all these cultures together really did a great job. So props to them. I think that's the biggest thing that worked for me.
So like maybe the creation of the world
building
pretty
a little
good.
Bit. Yeah. I think my favorite my favorite episode was episode 5. Was it episode 5 when Mount Doom, which wasn't Mount Doom yet, exploded?
Yeah.
I thought that was very well done visually, very cool. So yeah, I think
very tightly constrained around that whole event too. Like it was
right.
There wasn't all the jumping around that we were grumbling about the first couple episodes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that was the biggest thing that worked for me.
Okay, well, I'd agree with that too. I felt like it had the look of the Peter Jackson movies, but with a higher level of color saturation, maybe.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes sense, right? Because with Hulk, the further you go back, the bigger and the more vivid and the more everything is. Very much like the sort of Hindu ages of the universe, right? Everything is degenerating slowly with time, which is an interesting subject for its own video, I'm sure. But so here we've got the second age. It's brighter, it's more vivid, it's very colorful, it's got all that. A lot of things in this show worked for me. I thought the action scenes were fun. They were pretty well done. Not like super spectacular, right? It's not John Wick or anything, but effective. There was the scene where Galadriel was training the troops. That was pretty fun. Not really sure if it was needed, but there it is, And they repeat the common fantasy trope of people fighting with live swords with sharpened blades, which, if you've done any sort of martial arts training, you're a lunatic if you do that. But, that's just Hollywood, they do that. Yep. I liked the tone of the show. That's a biggie for me. And I really focus a lot on that with fantasy, especially. There was So my son got me to watching this show called Vox Machina.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's an animated show based on the Critical Role series.
Hmm.
And I really struggle with it because it's such a goofy, jokey tone in the first few episodes. And then it's just full of all these role-playing game cliches, like the oversexed bard and the big dumb barbarian and all this stuff that, we've seen and done. And, if you've played any role-playing games like I have since like ancient times, you've seen this done a million times. And so I really didn't enjoy that very much. It was all just sort of goofy and not taking anything seriously. And the characters would do stuff like, we're this mercenary band. We fuck shit up, I'm like, okay, so that's the kind of show we're watching here. And that gets on my nerves and grates on my nerves. It didn't bother a lot of people. A lot of people love that show. And that's cool. That's totally fine. Rings of Power didn't do that. I felt like they got the tone right. Pretty good. Is it as elevated and as regal as Tolkien? Nah, but I mean, I can't expect that. That would be unfair. Jackson didn't reach that level either.
Right.
I don't know if anybody really would even try nowadays. So it could have been way horrible, and it wasn't. I like the acting. I thought the actors were very good. I particularly liked Disa and Durin and Elrond. That whole thing, like those scenes, I enjoyed. Galadriel sometimes got on my nerves by being kind of a one note particularly at the beginning. So there's that, but otherwise, she's got a big role to fill, like a hard act to follow with Cate Blanchett. And if the stranger is Gandalf, I'm really hoping that he's a blue wizard instead. I'm on Team Blue Wizard. But if they're going with Gandalf, I would understand why they were doing that. I think that's a little more cowardly of a choice. But if they're going there, they're going to have to deal with that with him too, right? Because then he's got to measure up to Ian McKellen, and I wouldn't want to be that guy. No. He seems like a good actor so far. I mean, I like that character as much as we've seen him get to do. But
all his screaming.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, right. And he's barely got any lines, except at the end where he says, "Always follow your nose," right?
Yeah, right.
So, like, oh, a Gandalf line.
Yeah.
But then maybe that's just a wizardy line, right? That's just something wizards do in general. I don't know.
Right.
I've seen a lot of videos talking about that. Who is this guy? And the showrunners are still not saying one way or the other for sure who he is. Sometimes, and this is a complete aside, but I still wonder if these guys don't watch some of those more popular, at least, videos and see, should we go this way or that way based on the reaction? They certainly seem to do that with Rise of Skywalker. Right? So tone, acting, atmosphere, the music is great. I've listened to the score many times. Have you listened to that on its own?
Yeah, the Bear McCreary.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great score. It felt like it's on par with Howard Shore, but it's not trying to just reproduce it. The dialogue is mostly okay for me. Like I felt like the elven dialogue was lyrical and poetic and elevated enough. And the hobbits, the Harfoots were hobbity and the elves were elfy and the dwarfs were dwarfy and all that kind of thing, that it seemed to fit. Any comments on any of those things? Did you agree or disagree? Or
I think the biggest,
there's a whole lot more going on than just those things.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think my biggest shining light of this whole thing, because I would say, am I breaking up a little bit? Yeah. No. Am I good?
No,
I'm good.
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I think the biggest shining light for me, and I think we should get into it later, has been and will be the difference between this show and what the message is for the audience versus that of something like House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. And I think my biggest disappointment is that they can do it better, and they should, coming into season 2. Like, they really should be reflexive enough and say, hey, listen, we didn't get a lot right. I mean, I think the showrunners have even said, like, the season 2 will be the most canon season thus far. I mean, like, I'm like, what do you mean thus far? Like, there's only been one season. And are you saying that this season wasn't, like, aligned with Tolkien's canon? Like, what is that? There's an implicit statement there. So yeah, I the dwarves were my favorite part of the series by far. I thought that I thought they did it really well. I don't like what they did with Gil-galad. A lot of my previous complaints in our previous video on Rings of Power still ring true. No pun intended. But
yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's get into that then. The things that didn't work for me. Well, okay, let me back up just one more thing. There's one more thing about the show that I did like, and I felt like you just nailed it. And I didn't have that in my notes, but it was the theme. The theme of good versus evil, and there's a definite good and there's a definite evil, and I realize they're probably going to go with a let's watch Sauron become the evil Dark Lord thing later, but he's evil enough here already, right? So that we're not trying to make him a morally gray character and all of that kind of stuff. Let's all root for Sauron and let's look at Lord of the Rings from the bad guy's point of view and all that kind of crap. All right, no, just no. That's why I never had any interest in things like Grendel, which is showing Beowulf from Grendel's point of view. And there was a movie that came out called Beowulf and Grendel with Gerard Butler.
Oh yeah.
Which you would think would be amazing, but it was horrible because of this very thing. Oh, let's relativize it. Let's give me a break. It's Grendel. He's evil. That's that. All right. No, stop with the sympathetic villain stuff. I don't think they're going to do that with Sauron here. I think they're going to go with more like a villain who's a villain, but you can kind of low key see where he's coming from, so that he's interesting. Like Thanos, something like that. I think is probably what they're going to go for, and at least I hope they do that. It seems like that's where they're going, where he's saying, I want the best for Middle Earth, but that means me being the boss of everything and making everything the way I want it. Right? It's like, well, that's still kind of evil, dude. Okay. But if they'd had it to where everyone's morally gray and everyone has all these ulterior motives and all that kind of jazz, no. And they didn't do that. So I'm glad they didn't do it. They didn't have a bunch of, gratuitous sex scenes and all this kind of stuff I was worried about. Earlier.
Absolutely.
Are they going to try to turn this into some kind of, smarmy HBO Max thing,
Yeah.
So I was glad about that. But what things didn't work for me, I felt like at times the plot was a little bit contrived. Like there was some scenes where I was like, okay, this is obviously, incoming plot setup, like when she's looking at the map and she's saying, oh, this is a plot that the evil people will do if in the case of, so I felt kind of clunky there. It was mainly kind of the info dumping sections of the stories, which is always a challenge for fantasy. Any amateur fantasy writer out there knows that this is a major pain in the butt. And it's because you got all this setup you have to do, or else nobody's on the setup of the map as being one.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, guys.
Right. Technical difficulties. All right, I think we're back. So yeah, I was just talking about kind of the clunkier plot elements. Like the elves are going to come in here and take our jobs scene, right? That didn't work for me. I think they could have done that in a more organic way that would not have felt quite so forced. And I understand why they were doing it. They were trying to show the tension there. They were trying to show how Farazan can calm and quell the crowd by feeding into their ego, and that he's kind of a sleazy guy in that way, manipulative. I'm sure we're going to see more from him and his fabulous hair. But other than, it was just, it pulled me out because I realized, oh, this is, you need to think this now, and here's the scene that tells you this, um, so that felt kind of clunky. Some other things that didn't work for me, like early on, I felt like Galadriel was kind of a one-trick pony with the "I am a fierce and ferocious, vengeful warrior, and I'm just going to barge through every scene like a bull in a china shop." And it's tough because what they're going for is a character arc. I can tell that they're trying to go from that to what we see in the movies.
Yeah.
But it isn't until about 60% of the way through the season that they don't beat that to death so much that you're actually starting to, like Galadriel, because before that, it's hard to get behind her because she's kind of annoying. Even though she's actually, there was one scene where she's riding across Numenor on a horse and you see her smiling and enjoying herself. And it's like, oh, okay, that's more like the Galadriel. Like there's an actual person in there, right? That she can actually feel something besides rage 24 hours a day. So I just felt like they overdid that at the beginning.
Yeah.
We complained about the jumping around, and again, that's just setup.
Yeah.
I don't know what other way you can do that. And then there's one last thing that got on my nerves a little bit. Was I felt like they were doing so many callbacks to the movies. A few here and there is fine, but like they would literally repeat phrases like, always follow your nose, and I'm like, okay. I guess they're going for the Leonardo DiCaprio thing. Oh, I know that,
Right.
I know that, yeah. But that is just annoying. I'm getting tired of people in movies doing that kind of stuff. It's one of the things that we both loved about the Batman is that there's Easter eggs galore in that movie, but they're not like in your face.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the background, and that's where they should be. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I see. Galadriel for me she just seemed so. There was nothing endearing about her. Like I understood she lost her brother. I understood like all this bottled up rage, but like even when other people were trying to help her, when Elendil was having a conversation with her in Numenor, she threatened to kill everyone. Like I'm like, what? Yeah. Why would you do that? Like you're supposed to be this general, like this general of the elves, this grand general of the elves, but your ability to be a diplomat and somebody who just has a conversation about, hey, this is where we need to go because we need to get here. It almost felt like they just couldn't get there. And instead her dialogue was, you need to listen to me because I'm right. And if you don't listen to me, I'm going to hurt you. It's like a child. Right. And that's what that's what I felt. You were talking about Sauron. They overdid it. I think Sauron was like one of my, like at the end, I'm like, oh yeah, clearly I didn't like, clearly that was him. But were we surprised that was Sauron the entire time? Like the guy's a blacksmith. He is obsessed with crafting things. He, has like this mystic lineage that nobody really knows about. I think the reveal there was kind of half-assed a little bit. It's just like, how did he know? Like it made it seem like this was all a part of his plan the entire time. But how did he know that he was going to get injured and then sent to Eregion, right? And then Celebrimbor was going to be there. Like he didn't know any of that. Like he had no idea that was going to happen. But they made it seem like, and I'm like, come on, guys, really?
That seemed kind of forced. Him going there, like how could that have been part of his plan?
Right.
How could he have predicted that? I mean, I realize he's a Maiar and he's all that, but that was hard to swallow. And plus, I mean, we haven't talked about the other elephant in the room, which is the apocryphal tale of the Mithril origin of the Mithril. I really didn't like that very much.
I hated that.
It just felt completely out of nowhere. And now, what I really would love is if that whole story was, in fact, a lie created by Sauron to convince the elves to head them in that direction to make the rings,
Mm,
like some kind of 3D chess by Sauron. That would be interesting.
yeah.
I doubt that
Yeah.
they're going to do that, but there's one glimmer of hope that might be where they're thinking, and that's in the introduction of that story when Elrond says, "Yeah, but that's an apocryphal story, so we don't even know if it's true. In fact, it's widely considered to be not true." But then, for whatever reason, Gil-galad and Celebrimbor both take it as absolutely the only way to save the elves.
Yeah.
So what's up with that? I don't know where they're going with that.
Well, I think they took it as true because their tree was it was falling apart, right? It was becoming infected. Right. So like, oh, this is a sign that this is all real. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't understand. Yeah. You mentioned the movies, and I don't. They there was so many references to the movies, but they went so far out of their way to separate themselves from Peter Jackson. Like he even said, "Yeah, I'd love to come on and work on this with you guys," and they were like, "No, we don't need you." But they I think the best parts of it was that which connected it to that trilogy, right? But then they also tried to separate themselves. So yeah, there's a lot of I think the writers have a distinct neurosis in terms of what they're trying to do. I think there's a split with them, and they don't understand what they're doing, and it's like, oh, maybe we're over here, maybe we're over here. It's just like, guys, come on.
Well, right, because like if you're going to go for your own take, then do that.
Yeah.
Like they were going to do that with The Hobbit when Guillermo del Toro was going to direct it. And apparently they didn't like his vision because it didn't look or connect in any way to the, Peter Jackson trilogy. They wanted Peter Jackson to come in and just make more Peter Jackson movies so that they could rake in more cash. Okay, so that meant, though, that a unique and interesting new take on it we missed. I'd have loved to have seen that. I really would love to have seen that. We apparently only got bits and pieces of it. Like the Goblin King apparently they kept that design for him, which was great. It was totally disgusting and bizarre, but that's what I would expect from Del Toro, right? I would love, to love to see it. So here it seems like they're trying to do that, but not. They're trying to connect it aesthetically in some ways, but then still go and do their own unique thing. And like you say, it kind of comes across as split. So maybe in future seasons, I'm definitely still on board for plenty more of this. I'm loving it. Apart from these complaints that I have, I still sit down and my inner 10-year-old is enjoying the hell out of seeing elves and dwarves and magic and fantasy and all that stuff with such lavish production values. For me growing up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, if we saw a fantasy movie, it was like Dragon Slayer or Neverending Story, which are, I don't know about Dragon Slayer being a classic so much, but I mean there are some, they're well loved in their way, like they have some following, but they're very primitive compared to what we can do now. In terms of like the vision and everything. I mean, the best thing about Dragon Slayer is the dragon. The rest of it is only so. But maybe we'll do a movie. We'll do a review of that one of these days. But
why not?
Yeah, why not? I don't know if you've seen that one, but yeah. So there was some hiccups in that. Not enough to keep me from watching more, though, by any means. And this is the thing that just makes me laugh is, you get online in these discussions and everything, and now all of a sudden there's memes about like the Lord of the Rings is the serious head of the Hydra and the Hobbit, and then there's the goofy head of the Hydra, which is the Rings of Power. Right? You've seen those? And I'm like, oh, come on, guys. Now all of a sudden the Hobbit's okay, right? You were just hating on that for ad nauseum for years. And it's the worst thing ever made and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's got its problems, but it's still a lot of fun.
The same thing happened with the Star Wars prequel trilogy. As soon as the sequel trilogy came out, they were like, you know what? Prequel trilogy is it's pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, oh, get out of here, man. I was always a fan of it. And now all of a sudden you're trying to say it's great. Yeah.
Right.
Get out of here. Yeah. So yeah, those kind of things. So it sounds like though that those quibbles we mostly agree on them, but it seems like it got under your skin more than it did mine because those are things I'm like, yeah, I roll my eyes and I just keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Maybe it pulled you out of it more than it did me.
I okay, and this might just be me, and so I'm not. I fully admit that this is a bias that I have, but I do have a tendency to look for any kind of superficial political undertones, and if I see it, it completely pulls me out of whatever I'm watching, and I feel
Okay.
like at that point I'm being preached to instead of, you know, something that could be enjoyable for what it's worth. And I think that's what really kind of maybe I went into it with that bias, which I'll fully admit, but I wasn't. I was expecting a show for adults, but what I got was a show that wanted to be for adults, but didn't trust that their audience was adult enough to handle certain material. And I think that's the best of Tolkien's fantasy, is that the Lord of the Rings is for adults. It's not for children. When you read the Lord of the Rings, like that's a dense read,
Yeah.
But this felt like a version that it honestly, it felt like the show writers, the showrunners watched the Peter Jackson trilogy more than they actually read the books. So they were basing it off of that instead of Tolkien. Like that's the feeling I got.
Interesting.
But yeah,
maybe
no,
they did. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
why would they not? Considering how much money those things made, right? And they've got the bottom line to deal with. They got Papa Bezos breathing down their neck.
Right.
Right. Space billionaire.
Yeah. Shooting off his rockets everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that could be. So that you felt like, well, and maybe that's behind some of the critiques too about like the Sauron reveal. I've come across a lot of folks that were saying it was telegraphed, it was obvious from the beginning and all that. And I definitely thought from maybe the second episode on that he could be, and that's again, like how many hints are you going to throw in there? That's the art of storytelling, is if you're going to have a big plot twist, you have to set it up or else it'll feel arbitrary and like you're just jerking people around and they won't buy it. But if you put too much in there, then it won't be a twist. So there's a very fine line there. It didn't bother me that I was able to predict that. And it still was kind of up in the air at the end. Like, well, they're either going to go that way and make him Sauron, or they're going to come some other direction and make him out to be kind of an Aragorn type of character, who's the hero of the Southlands, who winds up dying tragically. Right? They could have done that. I was thinking they could go either way there, and they obviously went with the Sauron thing. Of course, you've seen all the memes now with him. They've got all these new meme material, right? Walking. Oh, one does not simply walk into Sauron unless you're this guy, right? And then he just walks in.
Well, it's interesting what they did with him, because Gilgalad at the beginning literally said something about Galadriel, saying like she has the potential. I forget the exact line, but he's like, she has the potential to bring the evil in, right? Like it's not. It's out there, but she's looking for it so much that she's going to invite it in, something along those lines. And I mean, that's literally what happens, is that if it wasn't for her, Sauron would have left Middle Earth, right? He would have been gone. And I hope that's something that they investigate. But yeah, with him, there were like these little red herrings throughout the entirety of the show. Like he crafted the Númenóreans' armor for them to travel to Middle Earth, but it was very horse oriented, right? The swords had a hilt that had a horse on it. So I'm like, is this the beginning of Rohan? Like, is this what's happening right now? Like, is this guy a kind of descendant of Theoden? On and so forth. Yeah, that you sent me a picture of that costume, just random Middle Earth dude, right? And it's like, this guy's definitely not Sauron. I was dying laughing for a Halloween costume. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's definitely not Sauron. No, he was the entire time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again, like it's really interesting that I feel like the showrunners just have to own. They have to own it. They have to own that they've made some mistakes. They've made some hiccups. I'm even though my rating is still pretty low for the show. I'll probably watch it, or to give the second season. At least give the second season a shot. But if by the end of the second season they're still really dealing with these issues, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be able to get through it.
One of the things, I've also got a list too of some of the things that annoyed other people, but I don't give a crap about. And
okay,
so I might throw that out there for the entertainment of all. Deviations from the appendices didn't really bug me that much because I realized that they've got like 150 words and they're trying to jam that into 5 seasons of material, so they're gonna be making up all kinds of stuff. I like that. And the new characters, of course, that bother me any. We talked about the power twist, the time compression, my piece with it. I realize that they have to do that, or that it makes for a easier watch if you don't have a new season that's set 100 years after the first season, because that's how Tolkien wrote this, the appendices. And instead we have a continuous story starting from here all the way, and I'm assuming they're leading up to the last alliance of elves and men.
Yeah.
And the One Ring going to Isildur and then him dying, and then I guess they're going to end it with the ring falling into the river or something like that. Who knows? The comparison to the Peter Jackson trilogy and the Hobbit movies, I think, is silly. They either, like you say, they either need to go with it or just do their own thing. So I would prefer they take it in a different direction, right? They do something unique and different with it. Now some of that might be some of the stuff that we don't like, like the the story about the Balrog and the elf of pure heart, who could be Glorfindel, by the way. I'd be okay. I'd probably be like, well,
is he around? Like, let's do it. Bring him back.
Right?
Like,
of course he is. Right.
Go for it. I mean, look, if that Balrog
died and was brought back.
That Balrog, I mean, he's just sitting there, and those doors have been digging, and then all of a sudden, that little fucking thing just falls down, and then he's awake. He's like that leaf, just like, come on, we gotta go, like Balrog time. Let's go. Bring back Glorfindel.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Right. Or Celeborn, I think they set that up. They're calling that one the Celebomb.
Yeah.
Galadriel dropped the Celebomb.
Yeah.
Well, he was my husband, then he disappeared. Well, of course they're not going to leave Chekhov's Celeborn on the wall. They're going to have him show up later. Otherwise, they've just failed storytelling 101.
Okay, I'm calling it now. All right. There's going to be a scene where she's out in the middle of nowhere and she's surrounded or something, like something's happening. And then he comes out of nowhere and he's like wearing like all these like raggedy clothes and everything. And then he starts fighting, and then she's like, "Oh, that's my husband, and he's alive." Or that's one way. Or she's in a dungeon somewhere and he's just hanging there and he's still alive. And she finds him.
Another theory could be that if they're going to go with the origin of Mithril as they've done it in the story here, then that could be Celeborn fighting the Balrog too. What happened? They could say that's what happened to him. He was trapped somewhere in prison or blah, blah, blah. Who knows? I don't know. Chilling out with the Harfoots,
But yeah, I don't know what you guys have been doing. These hobbits are great. I get all the snails I want. They have these giant raspberry looking things. They're delicious. They're really
messy.
Yeah, they're a little bit messy. They're a little bit dirty, but if you can get used to the smell and all the moss, you're good. You're
good, man. It's living the best life.
They brew some crazy honey wine. It's a good life.
So another way that they could take this in a unique direction is with the stranger and Nori. And I totally expected, given how many, parallels and callbacks or call forwards, I don't know how that works, is that they didn't have Poppy follow them and say, "I'm coming with you," kind of like being a Sam type character. I was surprised that didn't happen. And maybe we'll see her later. I have a feeling we will. But them taking the stranger and Nori and going off into Rune is one of the things that makes me think he might be a blue wizard. And I think that would be really cool. That could be something this show could own, because there's nothing, we don't know anything about these guys. So it's wide open. Don't make him Gandalf.
No.
We've seen that. We've seen that. Then they would have to shoehorn in all of that stuff with what we know about Gandalf, or be annoyed that they didn't. Right? Just avoid that, guys. I know that they're probably sitting at their computer waiting for this video to come out to get our droplets of wisdom on how to continue their multi-gazillion dollar trilogy, because we're such experts. But
well,
I think that would be a great way.
I think that you're right. I think it'd be cool. I also think it would be cool if he's Saruman, and this is how Saruman becomes kind of the spark of his he's developed a relationship with Harfoots, and like something happens, and that's the beginning of the rift within him as a Maiar, where it's just like this event happens and he starts to become like, it's a tragedy maybe, and he's like, I gotta create order in this world, and that's when it starts the ruminations into what you see in the trilogy.
That would be an interesting, because it's something they didn't explore in the films, is why Sauron went to the dark side. And there's plenty in there. Tolkien had that worked out, but Jackson just didn't have time to get into it. It's just poof, suddenly he's Christopher Lee, evil wizard.
Right? Yeah.
And anybody who knows anything about film knows he's already the bad guy, because he's played by Christopher Lee. He's always the bad guy.
Well, he originally wanted to play Gandalf, but it's just like Christopher Lee, man. Like, no, there's no way. There's no way.
He would have made a great Gandalf.
I think so.
Yeah, I think he would have.
But
we'll never see. We don't know how that's going to play out. So they could do that. So I guess at the end of the day, the thing that interests me, like from the cultural, psychological point of view, is that it's funny when you listen to the various complaints, how, at least just from my point of view, there's certain things that I really cue in on, like tone and the making sure you take it seriously. I don't like anything that has a nihilistic message to it, because that just doesn't impress me. I feel like people do that just because they're bored and being edgelords, right? And that I'm just like not impressed by it. And so that stuff I'm really zero in on. I zero in on things feeling kind of contrived and forced, and that bugs me. But a whole lot of other stuff that really bugs the hell out of other people, I'm like, I'm okay. I'm good. Like if the character arc isn't perfect, all right. Isn't that interesting, right? I don't know what's going on with that. Or like you say, you're really cued into, you don't want to feel like you're being preached to, right? That's fair. Who wants that, right? That's the whole problem with being heavy-handed with your theme. If you're going to develop a theme, make sure you don't beat the reader over the head with it again. You're just going to insult their intelligence.
Yeah.
Add some nuance, right? There's a whole reason for telling us. If I'm going to preach to somebody, then I should just preach. I don't need to tell a story to do that. A story allows you to give a message that has nuance in a way that can't be done otherwise. That's the whole point of using symbols. So I think that's why that irritates people so much. And I agree with that.
Well, I think the best stories are those that are archetypal, right? And those stories that resonate cross-culturally, transpersonally. I think bringing in modern kind of political ideologies just kind of completely takes you out of that. And when you're I'll give you for instance of something that kind of I just picked up on, and I don't know if it bothers me or not, because I don't know if the showrunners realize it or the writers realize what they were doing, or even the costume creators realize what they were doing. But one of the Southmen who was like pro Sauron, he was wearing a torque, right? And he was the only one wearing a torque. And I picked up on that. I was like, that's interesting that they chose to do that. He's the only one wearing a torque. And then at the end, like the second to last or the last episode, Sauron, right? Halbrand was wearing a torque. And I'm like, okay, I see what they were going there. I see that connection there. But I mean, for somebody like me that knows what a torque means,
Yeah.
again, like I was like, all right, I don't know how comfortable I feel with that. Like, do you understand what that means for certain people in a certain culture? And
Right. Yeah.
again, maybe I'm being too, I'm digging into that too much. But for me, picking up on that again, it's like, is there a suggestion here? And just my ability to think upon that, like think about that. Is there a suggestion here? Completely took me out of the show. But yeah,
I did not notice that.
Yeah,
I didn't even notice that. I just went in one eye and out the other.
yeah. I was like,
But
why is he wearing a
it's
torque?
one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, why are they doing that? Are they trying to make some kind of statement, or is it just a random choice that doesn't? My suspicion is that is the latter, because I mean, what would the message be really? I'm not sure. You know, like people of the Celto origins are evil or something like that. I'm like,
I don't know. I think that might be reaching. I think that might be reaching. But I don't know.
But the point is, though, that there are people that are sensitized to that sort of thing, and not just to those kinds of symbolisms, but other types. You know, like if all of the evil characters are dark skinned in a movie, say, you know, people are going to notice that. They're going to be like, what are you trying to say here, dude? You know, that kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing, you know, just from a different perspective. And that's a fair question to ask in both cases, I think. Is there some kind of ulterior motive to doing that? It is easy, I think, to get carried away with that. Like you say, you can stretch that a lot and, you know, start reading into things that aren't really quite there. And I think that the way to maintain some discipline about that is to try to make sure your criteria are as clear as you can. The one thing I've noticed, for example, in the Star Wars movies is that the female characters are all pure and are always right and always good and always heroic and courageous and perfect in every way and pretty much without flaw. Now, I think that Lucas probably just happened to do this because he had very limited number of characters to play around with, and Princess Leia, he wanted her to be strong and courageous and all that. But it seemed to continue in the stories, and Padme was pretty much the same way, right? There's ways to read some character flaws into that, but they were not real obvious. Like, why in the world, dude, you know, why are you falling in love with this guy who's clearly a complete train wreck? They just really he didn't really explore that very much. I think it was more like, well, I need her to fall in love with him so they can have Luke and Leia, and so boom, this is it. Right. All right. And so, but the Clone Wars, of course, gets into that more, which is good, right? I like that. But then in the sequel trilogy, you have the same thing with Holdo and Rose Tico and all these characters. They don't have any flaws or arcs or anything else. They're just there to kind of facilitate the male characters from having their arcs, which does a disservice to female characters, honestly, because you're treating them like muses that don't have a personality or humanity to themselves, right? That's not cool. Now, the TV shows, however, different issue. Like Andor, for example, has complex characters all across the board. I don't know if you've seen that show. Huge fan of it so far.
Oh yeah.
Very grounded, very a lot of the annoying stuff about the Star Wars TV shows are not present in this show. It is definitely aimed at an adult audience. You know, there's a lot of gray stuff going on, but that makes sense, at least for this show. And there's still, at the end of the day, the good and the evil, right? The Empire is definitely bad guys, and they need to be dealt with. And the rebels are trying to fight that. The gray comes in, and like, how far are we going to go to do that?
Right.
And that's a great question. I love to exploring that. It's just so I don't sound inconsistent. It's when there is no clear right or wrong, and everybody's just grabbing for whatever. And it seems like that's the point of the show, is when I sense nihilism, and I get irritated by that.
Yeah.
And I know you do too.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really good point, because I mean, with Star Wars, I always think of, you know, well, there are probably people that work for the Empire that were innocent, right? Like, they're not necessarily bad people.
Right.
But yeah, I think shows that really kind of are just talking and and showing us how bad people are, right? And this is the thing about House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones in general. It's just it's very much steeped in this idea that we need to provide people with this kind of hypersexualized gore and backstabbing kind of that nature of the human experience, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I think where Rings of Power has an opportunity is to show the opposite end of that spectrum, where, I mean, not everybody has a distinct narcissistic power complex that everybody has in all these Game of Thrones shows, right? Like you're not a king or queen that is just vying for power all the time. And I understand why it's appealing, but I think Rings of Power has the opportunity to show, like the Lord of the Rings did, that you can make a change for the net positive or the next generation, being generative and creative in your life, even if you're the smallest person, smallest being on the planet, right? And I think that's the core of where Rings of Power can go. But I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that, you know, where the writing is so well done and the cinematography and the pacing and editing is so well done with House of the Dragon. If the Rings of Power would just pick up on some of that and say, okay, but our message is going to be different, totally different, and it could work.
So they're really just struggling a little bit with execution, honestly. Yeah. That's what it sounds like to me. And I agree with that. I think that they're very new, and you can kind of see that. And the fact that they aren't like real veterans probably wouldn't be noticed in a show that was not Lord of the freaking Rings. Mm-hmm. You know, so like all eyes are on you because it's such a beloved series and franchise. I hate that word, but there we are. I mean, it's what it is. So so every little thing that they do, you know, is under scrutiny. But then that's because the stakes are really high. If they did tighten up those little areas, right, in the writing mainly, it's mainly just the writing. If they were able to do that, then it seems like they could really knock it out of the park because they got everything else going for them. They got great actors, they got great music, they got sets, you know, effects, all of this stuff. You know, and the even just like the cinematography, it's just gorgeously composed, right? It's not like your typical Marvel movie where everything's this muddy gray crap, right? I think they're finally getting away from that now, but so the look is all really well done too. So yeah, I haven't seen the Game of Thrones at all. Although I did notice something about myself on this, and that's I couldn't, like you said, I couldn't get into that stuff because I'm not really into the whole political intrigue and the backstabbing and all that kind of thing. But I have noticed, though, that there are some shows or stories that I am able to get into it as long as I've got an anchor character who's a good guy and I can get behind them. Right? Then it makes it interesting for me. But if absolutely everybody is a slime ball and underhanded, I just can't get into it. I know a lot of people love that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just not one of them.
You would hate Game of Thrones. You would, because the good guy that you like so much, he's dead. He gets killed off. Like again, it's where I see the optimism in something that, you know, that it's an adaptation out of Tolkien, and hopefully they just really stay true to the root of it, and even if they do make certain pivots when necessary, you know, in their adaptation, I'm okay with that, but just don't make it something superficial. Don't make it something politically oriented. If they stick to that, then I'm good. Where and Game of Thrones, it's that pessimism. It's like everybody wondered why they hated the ending of Game of Thrones, and it's just like, well, this is why. It's because everything is terrible in this world, and nothing is going to end well. Pause.
Sorry.
One.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, we're back. Another break in the action. Brought to you by, no, I'm just kidding. So so end result, I think if they stick with the heart, like bring that out. And I think they've got the right idea, and they're really going for that, I feel like. And they can kind of tighten up these executionary issues, right? These little clunky bits. Then it'll be something for the ages, you know. If they keep doing this, then it'll only be something that's okay and fun until we're ready for the next thing. So that they've got an opportunity, and they haven't completely flubbed it up, in my opinion. And it sounds like you're still at least going to give it one more chance. They haven't irritated you beyond all recognition.
We'll see. I mean, I'll give, if season 2 opens with Glorfindel fighting the Balrog or Celeborn, that'd be. I'm like, all right, you got me, I'm in. Like it's just, and it's like they don't even explain it. It's just like it's like the beginning of Two Towers when Gandalf's fighting the Balrog and he's falling, but instead it's Glorfindel now, and he's like doing it. I'm in. Yeah. All right, I'm right. Okay.
It's funny you mentioned that scene. Like the very first time I watched that, I was watching it with one of my friends, and that whole business where the Gandalf versus Balrog, and then they charge and then boom, and as soon as that scene's over with, he leans over and says, "Well, that was worth the price of admission. I'm right there by itself."
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I was in the theater and I was like, did they make a mistake? Like, why are they replaying this scene from Fellowship? And then that all went down. And I was like, oh, and I'm like 12, right? So it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll give it.
I wasn't 12, but I thought it was great.
Right. Oh man.
All right. Well, that's what we got today.
That's what we got, guys. It's great to see you again, Dr. G.
All right. I'll be back.
We'll be back.
We got a lot more.
All right. See everybody later. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye-bye.